Thank you very much, and it's very good to be here in this beautiful place. It's my first time in Delphi, and somehow I think as we consider some of the most complex challenges of the modern world, it feels appropriate to be here, after all, in the seat of Pythia, the oracle who was consulted for questions about the ancient world, and perhaps we'll find some answers today as well as we found some years ago. It does, though.
Never gave good answers.
No, but I've heard that as well. We'll try to do better than that. But it does feel somehow appropriate to look back as we are in this ancient place while we also look forward in considering the implications of the fourth industrial revolution, because after all, they are going to be profound. And if this is the fourth, then there must have been three before it, as was mentioned. And briefly thinking about those, we had initially in the 1700s the invention of the steam engine, harnessing steam, leading to the first time in history when a machine could go faster than a horse, and therefore people could go faster than horses as well. And you think about the profound implications of the railroad on how the world operated across the world. You think about the second industrial revolution, you're really talking about, again, the invention of electricity and ultimately the combustion engine, and that too led to the invention of the automobile sector and many other innovations too. And the changes from that were absolutely profound as well, some of them very positive and others perhaps less positive. The third industrial revolution really begins, I suppose, in the 1970s with the invention of the microprocessor. And as a company, we at Microsoft, I suppose, benefited a great deal from that, and we still do benefit from that, but it's worth considering the fact that we are now, indeed, I think, in a different era, a fourth revolution. And as you read what's being said about that, it really is taking place in the context of three distinct worlds, all of which I think the minister mentioned. One is the physical world, the invention of new materials, robotics, 3D printing, and so on. But that's not all. We also have innovations in the context of genetics, engineering, biology that will change how human healthcare operates, how we raise livestock, and so on. The third really is the digital dimension, as you consider things like artificial intelligence. We'll talk about more in this session, IoT, disruptive business models such as Uber and Airbnb. And as you think about all of those revolutions in retrospect, one thing that's interesting, I think, to consider is that each had a single invention, or perhaps at most two, that led to those changes. In the case of the first, we're talking about steam again. And the second is electricity and harnessing that to create the combustion engine. And the third, the microprocessor. And the fourth today really has all those things I talked about have one thing in common, and that is the cloud. We think about cloud computing, the modern data center, which is a combination of immense computing processing power with enormous amounts of data to lead to real innovations and effective outcomes. As a company, obviously, we feel that the opportunities to improve human life are manifold and numerous when it comes to the innovations we have from cloud computing. You think about healthcare as only one example. As people use machine learning and analytics as a means of identifying how cancers grow and how perhaps they can be treated most effectively. You think about changes in the context of agriculture with precision farming, as an example. You think about opportunities for people, say, with disabilities, of whom there are over 1 billion people on this planet. What does it mean to bring essentially computer vision to somebody who is blind? And then there are other things we talk about as well these days that will have consequences that are very profound, in addressing some of the most challenging problems of our time. Climate change, which we're trying to address through what we call AI for Earth. So the positive story is certainly compelling and full of proof points, but at the same time, I think it's critical that we not look at this new world through uncritical eyes. There are, in fact, disruptions. There have been disruptions. There'll be more disruptions down the road. How do we address those things? So as a company, we're trying to contribute to a discussion around what we think is appropriate to refer to as a cloud for good, or a cloud for global good. And we think that has at least three different dimensions. We can talk about perhaps more. One is around trust, the need for a trusted cloud. And we as a company have focused always, of course, on trust and on security of technology. But in the wake of the Edward Snowden revelations, when Edward Snowden got in a plane with 4 laptops in the US and went initially to Hong Kong and then to Russia, where he still is today, trust became an issue, and trust in technology became an issue. And so as we thought about that as a company, we thought about how we make sure we are creating and restoring and maintaining trust in technology. And for us, that means we're focused on a number of different things. One is around physical security and security of software that we develop and deploy. A second is around privacy of data. People are focused these days, as they should be, on the privacy of their own personal data. How is it being used? And our emphasis, of course, is making sure people appreciate that data in our data centers is not our data, is our customers' data. A third element of trust for us has to do with this notion of transparency. What is being done with data? Where does it move? How is it being used or not used? If we get a request from a government, for example, for data that sits in our data centers, what do we do with that request? How do we respond to that request? And we're very transparent about that as well. And by the way, have taken steps to sue even the US government, and the US, of course, where Microsoft is headquartered, as a means of protecting our own customers' data privacy. So transparency is key. And finally, around trust is this notion of compliance. As we become essentially the outsourced IT provider for our customers, it's vital, of course, that we are developing solutions that will be compliant with applicable laws, otherwise no one's going to use them. So the trust component has all those different dimensions to it, but there's more as well that we think it's important to focus on in this new paradigm. And the second is really the notion of being a responsible cloud provider. And for us, that has also different dimensions. One certainly is how we use energy. I mean, let's be clear, as a company, Microsoft uses in a given year as much electricity as a small-sized US state, as one example. It's projected that over the course of the next 10, maybe 20 years, each of the major cloud providers, say Microsoft and Google and Amazon and Facebook, will consume as much electricity as a medium-sized European country. And so for that reason, we are focused increasingly on the importance of renewable energy, whether it's wind or solar or hydro. And today, roughly 50% of our energy consumed is from renewable resources, and we'll do more and do better over the course of time. Finally, there's this notion of a cloud that is going to not leave people behind. And we've talked a bit already about the notion of disruption of jobs. Some jobs have gone away altogether. Some have been transformed, and more of that will happen over time. How do we create an environment in which cloud technology is not going to leave people behind? For us, that means just a few things I'll highlight, and then I'll close. One is making sure we are preparing people for the future, including here in Greece, certainly, where I know this is a big emphasis for the folks within the team at Microsoft. There is going to be an increasing need, clearly, for new skills at younger ages, for kids who know how to code, for kids who are understanding well STEM-related subjects. And again, as a company, I know here in Greece, we've trained over the course of the past 5 years about 150,000 kids in computer skills. But it's also important to focus not just on young people, but also on later generations as well. People who will need new skills, whose jobs have been disrupted. And there, too, we're focused as a company doing what we can to make sure we identify opportunities that are developing and skill people who are mid-career for those opportunities. Just as one example, we're working with the Empowerment Organization in Greece and have a goal to reach 500,000 people in Greece with free digital skills over the course of the next couple of years until 2020. Are we wrapping up? And we are, in fact, wrapping up. And so that's an area of focus as well. And finally, as well, I mentioned again earlier, the challenges for people with disabilities, of whom there are so many. Technology can do so much there as well. So again, for us, this idea of cloud needs to have these different elements of it. The idea of trust, the notion of responsibility, the notion of inclusiveness. There are indeed many challenges and many opportunities, and hope we can talk more about some of those today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.